Well, this is something of a televisual first, a face-to-face encounter between the Business Secretary and his shadow, Ken Clarke, Shadow Business Secretary, and Lord Mandelson for the government. Peter Mandelson, why hasn't the economy recovered more strongly?
Well, thankfully, the economy now is in positive growth. As the Chancellor said, it would take place at the turn of the year. It has, but it remains fragile. And what we've got to do now is to lock in the recovery and not put away...
This is a dreadful figure.
Well...
0.1%.
Well, it's positive growth. The recession is behind us, and as most business people will tell you up and down the country, the improvement has been stronger during the last quarter than I think these figures suggest. But what's important is locking it in rather than pulling away the government support for the economy, as the Conservatives would do. We also need to generate more confidence in the economy rather than talk it down, as David Cameron keeps on doing. But we also need to maintain the government's particular investment in manufacturing, the new technologies, growing markets and sectors that are going to drive our economy's growth in the future and where the future jobs are going to come from. So we should not be withdrawing that support for the economy either.
Ken Clarke, it's not quite what people were expecting.
It's not. I thought it would be weak, but I thought it would be a little more than this. It could not be smaller. I mean, I welcome the fact we have growth, but anything less would have been catastrophe. I mean, disaster. We're already the last developed country to come out of the recession. We're just showing growth, and it shows how fragile everything is. And this has got to be turned into real growth. We're all agreed on that. We have to prepare to actually get back to some normality.
The important point, and I just want to pick this up from what Ken said, because I agree with him, the recovery is fragile, and therefore we must at all costs not take risks. We mustn't kick away the support that the government gives to sustaining demand in the economy by making sort of sudden and swinging cuts in government spending and investment.
Now, Peter Mandelson has just quoted exactly what you said in the Sunday Times.
Yeah, and I agree with him.
Exactly what you said in the Sunday Times.
No, he's not. I said you have to start cutting straight away. That's what I said.
George and Philip will have cooperative colleagues, but their duty is to make sure we don't, by mistake, make damaging and unsupportive cuts.
I was explaining how we start. I also said we should start straight away. And I actually do believe we have to start straight away.
But how can you talk about cuts straight away when these figures are entirely dependent on government spending?
No, they're not entirely dependent on government spending. The growth and the plateauing has been achieved largely because of low interest rates, largely because of the massive amounts of liquidity being injected by the bank. The bank can't do that for much longer. I hope
also,
let me answer the point about cuts.
Peter Mandelson,
well, I was going to say that we've also come out of this recession more strongly because unemployment didn't climb to the levels that people expected, as it had done in the recessions of the 90s and 80s.
Yeah, that is true, because people are keeping labour and people are cooperating by freezing their wages and so on. The average member of the public is not hanging the bell and bunting out and ringing bells. Their real living standards, as we know today, have actually been declining.
No, the people who are the real heroes
during this stress.
The people who are the real heroes of this recession are the businesses that have cut costs but survived, the employees who have taken cuts in their working hours and their incomes in order to help their businesses get through. But the truth is that as a result of this and the government's support, business failures and insolvencies are half what they were in the recession of the 1990s, and housing repossessions also are at half the rate. Now, this is a very important point, because it means the economy has emerged more strongly and more intact than many people feared or predicted at the beginning of this crisis.
Is that true, Ken Clarke? Is that true?
No, it's not. It's the weakest, it's the longest, deepest recession we've had. We're the last country of the Western world to emerge, and everybody else is well ahead of us in 0.1%.
But our interest rates are low, the unemployment is low, these are points.
The unemployment, which reasons we're given, has not gone up as much as we feared. Interest rates are low because the independent governor of the bank has made them low, and he can only keep them there if government borrowing doesn't drive them up. Let me deal with this cutting point. The difference between...
You're saying business failures?
Well, business failures are not as great in this recession. Now, that's partly, as I say, because of the efforts made by businesses, but also because the government helped cash flow by giving people time to pay their taxes. policies.
These are fringe things,
They're not
Peter.
fringe things, they're very
and
important
you're
for
splitting
businesses.
hairs on the statistics, the number of companies that have gone
I'm
bust.
trying
Great
not
than
to.
it was, the rate is... No, it's the other way around. The rate is high. Let us not split hairs.
I'm trying not to split hairs.
The key difference between us is you reckon that continuing to increase public spending and continuing to increase public borrowing is somehow important, which is what you're doing. That is nonsense.
Let me make an observation.
Well, do you think there would have been, would there have been 0.1% growth without that action?
Probably, because I think what the bank has done is far more important than this, what's called fiscal stimulus. It's actually keeping spending going up to an election.
Let's just cut to the quick, because the quick is that it was Gordon Brown who said that Britain is in a uniquely well-placed position to come out of a recession. This gives the lie to that, doesn't it?
No, I don't think it does in the least, but let me take up the point, because we're having a debate here, take up the point that Ken has made. Of course we have to focus on reducing the financial deficit, and of course we have to pay back debt. Nobody is questioning whether we have to do that. It's how and when.
And you say after the election?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying, look, I've already taken...
Well, Alistair Darling,
I've taken
he's
reductions...
saying this is going to be a very, very painful
Worse for
period.
20 years.
Of course, but the question is this, when? Now, I much prefer Ken Clarke's views than the views...
My views are you start now.
Than the views he gets from his central office script.
it's not from central office.
Well, cutting now, he's just said that is actually the Conservative position.
That's what I said on Sunday.
No, well, we all read very carefully what
No,
you
you
said on
didn't.
Sunday, and I'm
That's
sure
what I said
George
on
Osborne
Sunday.
was listening in particular. But the point, I think, is this. If we're not careful and we start making swinging cuts in government spending and investment before the recovery is locked in, we will not be trimming back the branches of public spending. We will be cutting the roots of our future economic growth. That would be a fatal miscall, a fatal misjudgment. And I'm afraid it is precisely the one that George Osborne and David Cameron are walking into. Not Ken Clarke. He doesn't agree with this.
I do agree.
But the others are in danger of walking straight into this trap, and it would be a disaster for us economically in the future.
If we give way to siren calls that this 20-year record-breaking cuts can be postponed for a bit longer till after the election, then what will happen is interest rates will be driven up, the governor will not be able to hold them, we will have the double-dip recession.
We have
for political reasons.
No, I'm sorry.
I want to move on.
Sorry, we've said precisely.
We've
said precisely
to
the
make this growth
Chancellor
get
set it
developed.
out in the pre-budget report. He'll do so again in the budget. When the deficit reduction will take place, how it will be halved over 4 years.
He has not given any
Yes,
detail
he has. He's given a darn sight more detail than anything we've heard from George.
No, that's not.
Let me take you back to this salient thought, which is that Germany and France are both in growth. They're small, but
We know why that's the case.
But
Low
that,
deficit, low debt.
does give the lie that in some way Britain is better placed than anybody else to come out of it. We are the worst in the G8, bar Japan.
I don't agree with that, because our unemployment is lower. Our businesses are more intact. Our basic economic capabilities have been much less damaged during the course of this recession than any...
The yardstick is growth, and our growth is anemic compared with Germany and France.
I'm afraid the yardstick are the basic capabilities, business startups and growth of those businesses which are going to produce our future increased GDP.
So when
Now,
Mr Cameron did not mention growth in his conference speech, you were fully with him. Growth doesn't matter.
Of course it matters, John, but the question is how we achieve that growth. We don't achieve growth by talking about it. We achieve it, for example, by giving priority to private sector investment.
Well,
that's why we are not going to reduce the capital and investment allowances for industry and for businesses, as the Conservatives are calling...
Ken Clarke, are we the worst economy in the
We are the
G8?
worst affected.
But why is that irrelevant?
No, don't keep interrupting me. I listened patiently to all this slightly irrelevant nonsense, Peter, you were going out with.
Why is investment irrelevant?
We have minuscule growth. We have the biggest deficit. We have the biggest, fastest rising debt. Now, that's not a coincidence. You won't have growth if you crush it with this deficit, if this debt, if that turns into higher interest rates.
And we've covered that already.
The threat is higher interest rates. We haven't covered it properly.
Yes,
Your Fred,
We're
totally
agreed on
false
this.
argument.
We're agreed on this.
We're
I
not
agree with
agreed
you.
on this.
Yes, we are.
You want, for electoral purposes, to put off tackling the deficit till after the election and run the risk of crushing growth. I don't think you believe that actually, if it wasn't for the election, we should put it off. You know perfectly well, as Alistair keeps warning, we have serious cuts to make. The more you delay, the more you run the risk of Britain crawling along at 0.1%, where the French and the Germans grow faster and they don't have the debt, they don't have the deficit to hold them back.